In the shadowed depths of ancient times, when the world was young and magic flowed like rivers through the lands, there emerged a group unlike any other. They were seekers, philosophers, mystics, who dared to question the very fabric of existence itself. This is the story of the Psijic Order, the most enigmatic and powerful magical organization ever to walk between the realms of mortals and gods. Picture, if you will, the early days of the Altmer civilization on Somerset Isle. The elven society had grown rigid, bound by increasingly formal religious structures and political hierarchies that stifled the very essence of magical exploration. The worship of their ancient deities had become ceremonial, drained of the raw spiritual power that once connected mortals directly to the forces of creation. It was in this environment of spiritual stagnation that the first whispers of rebellion began to stir. These weren't political revolutionaries or military insurgents. These were the deep thinkers, the ones who looked beyond the surface of reality and saw something fundamentally wrong with the direction their civilization was heading. They watched as their people became increasingly dependent on external validation for their understanding of truth, as magic became formulaic and predictable, losing the flexibility and power that came from direct engagement with the underlying forces of existence. The founder of what would become the Psijic Order was a figure known only as Yakusis, a name that would echo through millennia of mystical tradition. Little is known about his origins, but what is certain is that he possessed an unprecedented ability to perceive connections between seemingly disparate phenomena, recognizing patterns in the flow of magical energy that others missed entirely. Under his guidance, these early seekers began to develop what they called the Old Way, a philosophical and practical approach to understanding reality that would form the foundation of all their future teachings. The Old Way represented a radical departure from conventional Altmer thought, where mainstream society sought to impose order through hierarchy and control. These mystics embraced the fundamental chaos that underlies all existence. They recognized that attempting to force reality into predetermined patterns was not only futile, but actively harmful to both the practitioner and the world around them. Instead, they developed techniques for observing and working with the natural flows of energy that permeated all things. This philosophical stance put them in direct conflict with the growing influence of formal religious worship in Altmer society. The established pantheon, with its clearly defined roles and hierarchies, offered comfort and certainty to people struggling to maintain their identity in an increasingly complex world. The gods provided clear answers to difficult questions and established moral frameworks that could be applied universally. For many Altmer, this represented progress and civilization at its finest. But the mystics saw something far more troubling in this development. They recognized that the formalization of divine worship was creating barriers between mortals and the fundamental forces of creation. By channeling all spiritual energy through predetermined divine intermediaries, the Altmer were cutting themselves off from direct experience of the deeper mysteries. The gods, whether consciously or not, were becoming filters that limited rather than enhanced mortal understanding. Yakusis and his followers argued that this approach was not only spiritually impoverishing, but practically dangerous. They observed that magic practiced through rigid religious frameworks became increasingly predictable and limited, losing the flexibility and power that came from direct engagement with the underlying forces. More concerning still, they noticed that practitioners who relied too heavily on divine intermediation began to lose their ability to perceive reality directly, becoming dependent on external validation for their understanding of truth. As their philosophy developed, these early mystics began to attract others who shared their perspective. Word spread quietly through scholarly circles of a group that offered an alternative to the increasingly rigid structures of mainstream Altmer society. They weren't openly recruiting or challenging the established order, but simply living according to their understanding of the old way. Only shadows melting into darkness, demonstrating through their actions what was possible when one approached reality with genuine openness and humility. The search for a place where they could pursue their studies without interference led these seekers to discover something extraordinary. Between Somerset Isle and the mainland of Tamriel, floating in waters that seemed to exist partially outside normal space and time, they found the island of Artaeum. This wasn't just another piece of land. It was a nexus point where multiple layers of reality intersected, creating opportunities for unprecedented insight into the fundamental structure of creation. The island itself defied conventional understanding from the moment of its discovery. Ships approaching Artaeum often found their compasses spinning wildly, their chronometers displaying impossible readings, and their crews experiencing vivid dreams that seemed to bleed into waking consciousness. The very air around the island shimmered with an otherworldly quality, as if reality itself had been stretched thin, allowing glimpses of deeper truths to seep through the cracks. The first mystics to successfully navigate these treacherous waters and establish a permanent settlement on Artaeum weren't typical explorers or merchants. These were individuals who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the direction their homeland was taking, seekers who possessed the sensitivity to perceive the island's existence and the courage to seek it out. The island itself seemed to exercise a form of selection, accepting only those who approached with genuine humility and openness to transformation. Life on Artaeum was unlike anything these mystics had experienced before. The island's unique temporal properties meant that cause and effect operated according to different rules than those found in the normal world. Events that occurred centuries apart in linear time might unfold simultaneously on Artaeum, while actions taken in the present could have consequences that rippled backward through history. This environment forced the early Psijics to develop entirely new ways of thinking about causality, responsibility, and the nature of existence itself. The island's connection to the deeper mysteries of the world became increasingly apparent as the mystics learned to work with its unusual properties. They discovered that Artaeum existed at a point where the barriers between different realms of existence were naturally thin, allowing them to perceive and interact with forces that remained invisible in normal reality. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with ancient knowledge, and the air itself carried whispers of truths that had been forgotten by the outside world. This unique environment attracted individuals from across Tamriel who possessed the sensitivity to perceive Artaeum's existence. The island called to those who had reached the limits of conventional understanding and hungered for something deeper. Not all who sought Artaeum found it, and not all who found it were able to remain. The island's selective nature ensured that only those with genuine commitment to wisdom and understanding could become permanent residents. As their numbers grew and their understanding deepened, the mystics began to develop the organizational structures that would define the Psijic order for millennia to come. The role of Rite Master evolved naturally from Iakis's position as the most experienced and insightful member of the community. Unlike the hierarchical structures common in Altmer society, this position carried no inherent authority or power over others. The Rite Master served as a focal point for collective wisdom, a living repository of accumulated knowledge who could guide others in their own explorations without imposing predetermined conclusions. The growing philosophical schism between the Psijics and mainstream Altmer society became increasingly difficult to ignore as both groups developed in different directions. The formal religious institutions of Somerset viewed the Psijic teachings as potentially heretical, while political leaders worried about the implications of a group that claimed allegiance to principles higher than civil authority. The Psijics, for their part, became increasingly concerned about the direction their homeland was taking, seeing in its growing rigidity and authoritarianism the seeds of future catastrophe. The conflict reached a critical point when certain Psijic teachings began to spread beyond Artaeum, attracting followers among the general population of Somerset. The idea that individuals could achieve direct communion with the fundamental forces of reality without the mediation of established religious or political authorities proved deeply appealing to those who felt constrained by conventional society. This growing influence alarmed the established powers, who saw in the Psijic philosophy a direct challenge to their authority and legitimacy, rather than engage in open conflict. Yakusis made a decision that would define the Psijic order for millennia to come. Recognizing that their teachings required an environment of freedom and contemplation that was becoming increasingly impossible to maintain in the broader world, he led his followers in a gradual withdrawal from conventional politics and society. This wasn't a retreat born of defeat, but a strategic recognition that their true work lay in preserving and developing wisdom that transcended the immediate concerns of any particular civilization. The withdrawal was both physical and philosophical. The Psijics ceased their efforts to influence political developments in Somerset, focusing instead on their own internal development and the preservation of knowledge that they believed would be crucial for future generations. They maintained minimal contact with the outside world, accepting only those students who demonstrated both the ability to find Arteum and the wisdom to understand what they would find there. This decision established a pattern that would characterize the Psijic order throughout its long history. They would remain engaged with the world when cosmic forces threatened the fundamental stability of reality, but they would avoid entanglement in the political conflicts and social movements that occupied most mortal attention. Their loyalty lay not with any particular nation or people, but with the preservation of knowledge and wisdom that transcended such divisions. The centuries following this withdrawal saw the development of many of the practices and traditions that would define Psijic culture. The order established its internal structure, developed its unique approaches to magical education, and began the long process of documenting and preserving the wisdom they had accumulated. The island of Artium itself seemed to respond to their dedication, becoming increasingly attuned to their needs and providing resources and opportunities that would have been impossible in the normal world. The philosophical framework that emerged from those formative centuries on Arteum represented a complete reconceptualization of mortal existence and cosmic purpose. Where conventional Altmer thought sought to categorize and control the forces of creation through rigid hierarchies and divine intermediaries, the Psijics developed a comprehensive understanding of reality that embraced paradox, uncertainty, and the fundamental interconnectedness of all phenomena. This philosophy would eventually crystallize into the most profound and dangerous concept ever conceived by mortal minds: the Psijic endeavor. This ultimate goal represented the complete transcendence of mortal limitations through direct understanding and manipulation of the fundamental forces that govern existence. Unlike the religious salvation promised by divine worship or the power offered by Daedric patronage, the endeavor required no external validation or assistance. It demanded that practitioners strip away every assumption, every comfortable belief, and every inherited limitation until they stood naked before the raw truth of their own existence. The process was simultaneously the most liberating and most terrifying journey any conscious being could undertake. The early Psijic masters discovered that mortal consciousness operates under a series of self-imposed constraints that limit perception and possibility. These constraints, while necessary for basic survival and social function, create barriers that prevent direct experience of the deeper layers of reality. The endeavor taught that these barriers weren't permanent features of mortal existence, but temporary constructs that could be systematically dismantled through proper understanding and practice. The goal wasn't to destroy the self, but to expand it beyond all conventional boundaries until it encompassed the totality of existence. This expansion of consciousness required a fundamental shift in how practitioners understood their relationship to the world around them. Most mortals experience reality as a collection of separate objects and forces that exist independently of their perception. The Psijic teachings revealed that this separation was an illusion created by the limitations of ordinary consciousness. In truth, all phenomena arise from a single, undifferentiated source that manifests itself through infinite variations and combinations. The practitioner who achieved true understanding recognized that they weren't separate from this source, but were themselves one of its expressions. The philosophical implications of this recognition were staggering. If consciousness and reality were fundamentally one, then the distinction between observer and observed, subject and object, self and world became meaningless. The practitioner began to understand that their thoughts, emotions, and perceptions weren't private internal experiences, but expressions of the same cosmic forces that governed the movement of stars and the flow of rivers. This realization opened the door to abilities that seemed impossible from the perspective of ordinary consciousness. The capacity to influence events through pure intention, to perceive distant locations and future possibilities, and to exist simultaneously in multiple states of being. The Psijics developed sophisticated techniques for cultivating this expanded awareness while maintaining the practical ability to function in ordinary reality. They discovered that the key lay in learning to shift fluidly between different levels of consciousness, accessing the deeper layers of understanding when needed, while retaining the relationship between individual consciousness and cosmic structure, formed the foundation of Psijic metaphysics. They understood reality as organized according to a pattern they called the wheel, a vast, rotating structure that encompassed all possible states of existence. The wheel contained within itself every potential outcome, every possible choice, and every conceivable variation of reality. Most mortals experienced only a tiny fraction of the wheel's possibilities, following predetermined paths that limited their perception to a narrow band of potential experiences. The wheel itself was supported and maintained by structures known as towers, focal points of concentrated reality that served as anchors for the various layers of existence. These towers weren't merely physical structures, but metaphysical constructs that embodied fundamental principles of creation. Each tower represented a different approach to organizing and understanding reality. From the rigid hierarchies of conventional civilization to the chaotic creativity of pure possibility. The interplay between these different organizing principles created the complex tapestry of existence that mortals experienced as the world. The Psijics recognized that most mortals remained trapped within the wheel's rotation, following predictable patterns that limited their potential for growth and understanding. The conventional religious and philosophical systems of their time were designed to keep practitioners safely within these predetermined boundaries, offering comfort and certainty at the cost of genuine spiritual development. The gods themselves, whether Adric or Daedric, represented different aspects of this limiting structure, each offering their own particular form of spiritual imprisonment disguised as salvation or power. The ultimate goal of the Psijic endeavor was to transcend the wheel entirely, achieving a state of consciousness that existed beyond all limitations and categories. This transcendent state, known as Chim, represented the complete realization of individual potential, the recognition that the self and the cosmos were identical, that consciousness and reality were one, and that all apparent limitations were self-imposed constructs that could be dissolved through proper understanding. The path to Chim required the practitioner to navigate a series of increasingly dangerous realizations. The first step involved recognizing the illusory nature of conventional reality, understanding that the solid, predictable world of ordinary experience was actually a fluid, malleable construct that responded to consciousness. This recognition could be deeply unsettling, as it undermined every assumption about the nature of existence that most mortals took for granted. Many practitioners became lost at this stage, either retreating into comfortable delusions or becoming paralyzed by the overwhelming scope of possibility. Those who successfully navigated this initial revelation had to then confront the even more challenging realization that their individual identity was itself a construct. The sense of being a separate, autonomous being with fixed characteristics and limitations dissolved under careful examination, revealing itself to be a temporary pattern within the larger flow of consciousness. This dissolution of ego boundaries could be terrifying, as it seemed to threaten the very foundation of personal existence. The practitioner had to learn to maintain their functional identity while simultaneously recognizing its ultimately illusory nature. The final and most dangerous stage of the journey involved the complete merger of individual consciousness with cosmic consciousness. At this point, the practitioner faced what the Psijics called the ultimate test. The recognition that they were simultaneously everything and nothing. That their individual existence was both absolutely real and completely illusory. Many who reached this stage were overwhelmed by the paradox and ceased to exist as coherent beings, their consciousness dissolving into the undifferentiated source from which all things arise. Only those who could embrace both sides of the paradox simultaneously achieved true Chim. The Psijic approach to this ultimate realization differed significantly from other mystical traditions. Rather than seeking to lose themselves in cosmic consciousness, they maintained their individual identity while expanding it to encompass the totality of existence. This required a delicate balance between unity and separation, between absolute knowledge and practical wisdom. The practitioner had to learn to be simultaneously human and divine, limited and unlimited, mortal and eternal. The practical implications of this philosophy shaped every aspect of Psijic life and practice. Their rejection of conventional Adric and Daedric worship stemmed not from atheism or rebellion, but from a deeper understanding of the nature of divinity itself. They recognized that the gods, while possessing great power and knowledge, were themselves limited beings, trapped within particular aspects of the cosmic structure. Worshipping them meant accepting their limitations as one's own, trading the infinite potential of direct spiritual development for the false security of external validation. Instead of seeking divine patronage, the Psijics developed techniques for direct communion with the fundamental forces of creation. They learned to perceive and interact with the raw energies that underlay all manifestation, working with the basic building blocks of reality, rather than their more familiar expressions. This approach required tremendous skill and caution, as these forces operated according to principles that could be dangerous or incomprehensible to ordinary consciousness. The practice of meditation formed the cornerstone of Psijic spiritual development. Their meditative techniques differed significantly from the contemplative practices found in other traditions, focusing not on achieving states of peace or bliss, but on expanding awareness to encompass increasingly subtle layers of reality. Psijic meditation involved learning to perceive the underlying patterns that governed all phenomena, developing the ability to trace the connections between seemingly unrelated events and understanding the deeper principles that guided the flow of existence. Advanced practitioners developed the ability to manipulate temporal flows through their meditative practice. They discovered that time, like space, was a malleable dimension that responded to consciousness. By learning to perceive the underlying structure of temporal flow, they could slow, accelerate, or even reverse the passage of time within limited areas. This ability proved invaluable for their studies, allowing them to observe the long-term consequences of actions and to understand the deeper patterns that emerged over extended periods. The cultivation of wisdom through centuries of contemplative study represented perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Psijic practice. Unlike other traditions that emphasized rapid spiritual advancement or dramatic mystical experiences, the Psijics understood that true wisdom required the slow accumulation of understanding over vast periods of time. They developed techniques for extending their natural lifespans, not through magical intervention, but through the gradual harmonization of their consciousness with the deeper rhythms of existence. This extended perspective allowed them to perceive patterns and connections that remained invisible to shorter-lived beings. They could observe the rise and fall of civilizations, the gradual evolution of magical practices, and the long-term consequences of seemingly minor decisions. This accumulated wisdom made them invaluable advisors to those facing complex problems, though they rarely offered direct solutions, preferring to guide questioners toward their own understanding. The Psijic understanding of magic itself reflected their broader philosophical perspective. They recognized that what most practitioners called magic was actually the conscious manipulation of the same forces that governed all natural phenomena. The distinction between magical and mundane events was artificial, created by limited perception, rather than fundamental differences in the underlying processes. Advanced Psijic practitioners learned to work with these forces so naturally that their abilities appeared to be extensions of their normal consciousness rather than separate magical techniques. This integrated approach to magical practice eliminated many of the dangers and limitations that plagued conventional mages. By understanding magic as a natural expression of consciousness rather than an external force to be controlled, Psijic practitioners avoided the exhaustion, backlash, and spiritual corruption that often affected those who treated magic as a tool to be wielded. Their abilities grew organically from their expanding understanding, becoming more sophisticated and powerful as their consciousness developed. The philosophical foundations established through the old way provided the framework for magical practices that transcended conventional understanding. Where ordinary mages learned to manipulate specific schools of magic through rigid formulas and predictable effects, the Psijics developed abilities that emerged naturally from their expanded consciousness. Their mastery over temporal forces, spatial displacement, and the fundamental structures of reality itself represented not mere magical techniques, but direct expressions of their philosophical understanding, translated into practical application. The development of temporal manipulation among the Psijics began with their recognition that linear time represented only one layer of a far more complex temporal structure. through their meditative practices on Artaeum, where the island's unique properties allowed them to experience multiple temporal flows simultaneously. They discovered that consciousness could learn to perceive and interact with what they termed the temporal substrate, the underlying framework from which all temporal experience emerges. This substrate contained not just the present moment, but all possible presents, past configurations that might have been, and future potentials that could still manifest. Early practitioners learned to extend their awareness beyond the narrow focus of present moment consciousness, developing the ability to perceive events occurring across multiple temporal streams simultaneously. This expansion of temporal perception required careful training, as the untrained mind tended to become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information available across different time flows. The Psijics developed specific meditative techniques that allowed practitioners to filter and organize temporal information, learning to focus on relevant streams while maintaining awareness of the broader temporal context. The practical applications of this temporal awareness proved invaluable for understanding the deeper patterns that governed existence. Psijic masters could observe the long-term consequences of actions before they occurred, trace the historical roots of current problems back through multiple causal chains, and perceive the various potential futures that might emerge from any given situation. This ability made them extraordinarily effective advisors, though they rarely shared their temporal insights directly, preferring to guide others toward understanding through carefully chosen questions and observations. Advanced temporal manipulation required practitioners to move beyond mere perception into active engagement with temporal flows. The Psijics discovered that consciousness, when properly trained, could influence the rate at which time passed within localized areas. Master practitioners could create temporal bubbles where minutes stretched into hours, allowing for extended contemplation and study within compressed time frames. Conversely, they could accelerate temporal flow to observe the long-term development of natural processes, or to allow rapid healing and regeneration. The most accomplished Psijic temporal masters developed the ability to create what they called temporal echoes, manifestations of their consciousness that could operate simultaneously across multiple time streams. These echoes weren't mere illusions or projections, but fully functional aspects of the practitioner's awareness that could gather information, perform tasks, and even engage in complex interactions, while the primary consciousness remained focused elsewhere. The coordination required to maintain multiple temporal echoes demanded decades of training and represented one of the highest achievements in Psijic magical development. The relationship between temporal manipulation and divination formed another crucial aspect of Psijic magical practice. Unlike conventional divination, which relied on external sources of information or divine guidance. Psijic divination emerged from direct perception of the temporal substrate. Practitioners learned to trace the probability streams that extended from any given moment, following the various paths that events might take and assessing the likelihood of different outcomes. This approach provided far more accurate and detailed information than traditional divination methods, though it required considerably more skill and understanding to implement effectively. The development of Psijic portals represented perhaps their most visible magical achievement. Though the underlying principles remained carefully guarded secrets, these portals differed fundamentally from conventional teleportation magic, which typically involved forcing a path through the barriers between locations. Instead, Psijic portals worked by manipulating the spatial relationships that defined distance and separation. The Psijics understood that space, like time, represented a malleable dimension that responded to consciousness, with the apparent distances between locations representing temporary configurations that could be altered through proper understanding. Master practitioners learn to identify the connection points within this matrix, finding the pathways that linked distant locations despite their apparent separation. The process of opening a portal involved temporarily restructuring these spatial relationships, creating a direct connection between 2 points that bypassed the intervening distance. This restructuring required enormous precision, as any error could result in the portal opening into solid matter, temporal distortions, or even connections to realms beyond the mortal world. The Psijics developed elaborate safety protocols and verification procedures to ensure that their portals opened safely and accurately. The visual appearance of Psijic portals reflected their unique underlying principles rather than the dramatic tears in reality or magical doorways created by conventional teleportation. Psijic portals manifested as subtle distortions in the fabric of space itself. The air would shimmer with an almost imperceptible quality, like heat waves rising from sun-warmed stone, while the edges of the portal would blur and shift as the spatial relationship stabilized. Stepping through such a portal felt less like magical transportation and more like taking a single step that somehow covered vast distances. The mastery of spatial displacement extended beyond simple teleportation into far more sophisticated applications. Advanced practitioners could manipulate the spatial properties of objects and areas, creating spaces that were larger inside than outside, or causing objects to occupy multiple locations simultaneously. These abilities proved invaluable for the construction and maintenance of Psijic facilities, allowing them to create libraries that could contain infinite volumes, workshops where dangerous experiments could be conducted safely, and meditation chambers that existed partially outside normal space-time. The relationship between Psijic magical practices and the conventional school of mysticism created both opportunities and challenges for the broader magical community. The Psijics had developed many of the fundamental techniques that would later be codified into the mysticism school, including dispelling, soul manipulation, and the detection of magical auras. However, their approach to these techniques differed significantly from the standardized methods taught in conventional magical institutions, where traditional mysticism focused on specific spells and formulas that could be learned and repeated. Psijic techniques emerged from understanding the underlying principles that governed magical phenomena. A Psijic practitioner approaching a complex dispelling task would first examine the structure of the magic they sought to unravel, understanding how its various components interacted and identifying the key points where intervention would be most effective. This approach often proved far more efficient than conventional dispelling methods, though it required considerably more training and understanding to implement. The Psijic influence on mortal understanding of magical theory occurred primarily through their occasional students who returned to conventional society and their rare interventions in magical crises. These interactions introduced concepts and techniques that gradually filtered into mainstream magical education, though often in simplified or distorted forms. The idea that magic represented a conversation with natural forces rather than the imposition of will upon reality slowly gained acceptance among more thoughtful practitioners, leading to developments in magical theory that brought conventional practice closer to Psijic understanding. The development of techniques for becoming incorporeal represented one of the most distinctive aspects of advanced Psijic practice. This ability emerged from their understanding of the relationship between consciousness and physical manifestation. The Psijics recognized that the solid physical body represented only one possible configuration of consciousness, and that practitioners could learn to shift between different states of manifestation as circumstances required. The process of becoming incorporeal involved gradually reducing the density of physical manifestation while maintaining conscious coherence. Beginning practitioners learned to make their bodies translucent, allowing light and simple objects to pass through them while retaining enough solidity to interact with their environment when necessary. Advanced masters could achieve complete incorporeality, existing as pure consciousness that could move through solid matter, observe events without being detected, and interact with other incorporeal entities. This incorporeal state provided numerous practical advantages for Psijic operations. Practitioners could infiltrate secure locations without detection, observe events without influencing them, and travel through areas that would be impassable in physical form. The ability also proved valuable for certain types of magical research, as incorporeal consciousness could interact directly with magical phenomena without the interference of physical matter. The manipulation of probability represented perhaps the most subtle and dangerous of all Psijic magical techniques. This ability emerged from their understanding of the relationship between consciousness and the fundamental uncertainty that underlay all manifestation. The Psijics discovered that what most beings experienced as random chance actually represented the intersection of multiple probability streams, and that consciousness could learn to influence which streams manifested into actual events. Probability manipulation required practitioners to perceive the various potential outcomes that existed at any given moment, and to understand the factors that determined which possibilities would actualize. This perception involved extending awareness into the quantum level of reality, where individual events existed in states of pure potential until consciousness collapsed them into specific outcomes. The skill demanded extraordinary precision and understanding, as even minor errors could create cascading effects that altered far more than the practitioner intended. Master practitioners of probability manipulation could influence events in ways that appeared to be remarkable coincidences or extraordinary luck. They might cause a critical message to arrive at exactly the right moment, ensure that a dangerous enemy made a crucial mistake at the perfect time, or create circumstances that brought together individuals who needed to meet. These interventions were typically so subtle that they appeared to be natural developments rather than magical manipulations. The ethical implications of probability manipulation created significant debate within the Psijic order. The ability to influence events through such subtle means raised questions about free will, natural development, and the appropriate limits of magical intervention. The Order developed strict guidelines governing the use of probability manipulation, restricting its application to situations where the broader cosmic balance was at stake, and requiring extensive consultation before any significant interventions. The integration of these various magical disciplines created a comprehensive system of practice that allowed Psijic masters to function as guardians of cosmic stability. Their ability to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, combined with their mastery over spatial displacement and probability manipulation, made them uniquely qualified to detect and respond to threats that might not become apparent to conventional observers until it was too late to prevent catastrophic consequences. The training required to master these techniques typically spans several centuries, with practitioners gradually developing their abilities through careful study and practice under the guidance of experienced masters. The process could not be rushed or forced, as each level of understanding built upon previous achievements and required the practitioner to integrate new abilities with their existing knowledge and consciousness. The Psijic approach to magical education emphasized patience, precision, and deep understanding over rapid advancement or dramatic displays of power. The preservation and transmission of these advanced techniques required the development of specialized teaching methods that could convey not just the mechanical aspects of the abilities, but the underlying consciousness required to use them effectively. The Psijics created training environments that allowed students to experience the relevant states of consciousness directly, using the unique properties of Arteum to provide learning opportunities that would be impossible in normal reality. The mastery of temporal and spatial manipulation that defined advanced Psijic practice would prove essential when mounting political tensions in Somerset forced the Order to make the most dramatic decision in their history. By the middle of the First Era, the relationship between the Psijic Order and the Altmer authorities had deteriorated to a point where coexistence seemed increasingly impossible. The philosophical differences that had initially driven the Psijics to seek refuge on Arteum had evolved into fundamental disagreements about the nature of authority, wisdom, and the proper role of magical practitioners in society. The Altmer government of the late First Era had grown increasingly centralized and authoritarian, with the predecessors of what would later become the Thalmor establishing rigid hierarchies that demanded absolute loyalty from all magical practitioners within their territory. The ancient Altmer tradition of independent scholarship and mystical exploration was being systematically suppressed in favor of state-sanctioned magical research that served political rather than philosophical ends. Mages were required to register their abilities, submit their research for government approval, and demonstrate their loyalty through service to state interests. The Psijic Order's refusal to submit to these requirements created a growing source of tension with the Altmer authorities. The Order's members maintained that their loyalty lay with cosmic principles rather than political entities, and that their research into the fundamental nature of reality could not be constrained by the narrow concerns of any particular government. This stance was viewed by the Altmer leadership as seditious and potentially treasonous, particularly given the Order's growing influence among intellectuals and independent-minded mages throughout the archipelago. The situation reached a critical juncture when the Altmer government issued an ultimatum, demanding that the Psijic Order formally acknowledge the authority of the state and submit all their magical research for review and approval. The ultimatum included specific requirements that the Order cease their independent recruitment of students, end their practice of accepting seekers from outside Somerset, and provide detailed reports on all their magical capabilities and research findings. The government justified these demands by claiming Right Master Iacasis and the senior members of the Order recognized that compliance with these demands would effectively end their existence as an independent organization dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom and understanding. The requirements would transform them into a government department subject to political pressures and constrained by the limited vision of temporal authorities. More fundamentally, the demands demonstrated a complete misunderstanding of the nature of their work and the principles that guided their existence. The Order's response came not through direct confrontation or political maneuvering, but through the application of their most advanced magical capabilities. Rather than submit to external control or engage in a conflict that would inevitably result in the destruction of one side or the other, the Psijics chose to remove themselves entirely from the conventional reality where such conflicts could occur. The decision to make Artaeum disappear from the world represented the ultimate expression of their mastery over spatial and temporal forces. The disappearance of Artaeum was accomplished through techniques that had been developed over centuries of research into the fundamental nature of space and time. The island did not simply vanish or teleport to another location within the world, but was shifted into a parallel state of existence, where it remained connected to the normal world through subtle channels, while being effectively unreachable by conventional means. The process required the combined efforts of every master-level practitioner in the Order, working in perfect coordination to manipulate the spatial relationships that defined Artaeum's position within reality. The technical complexity of this achievement cannot be overstated. The Psijics had to maintain the island's internal coherence and habitability while severing its connections to the normal flow of space and time. They needed to preserve access to the natural forces that sustained life while preventing any external entity from detecting or reaching their location. Most challenging of all, they had to ensure that the displacement could be reversed when circumstances warranted their return, requiring them to maintain precise records of the island's original spatial coordinates and temporal position. The immediate aftermath of Artaeum's disappearance created widespread confusion and concern throughout Somerset and the broader magical community. Ships that had been sailing toward the island found themselves in empty ocean, their navigational instruments indicating that they had reached the correct coordinates, but finding nothing but normal seawater. Mages who had been in communication with Psijic contacts discovered that their magical connections had been severed, leaving no trace of the Order's continued existence. The Altmer government initially responded with disbelief, then anger, and finally grudging acceptance that the Psijic Order had successfully escaped their authority through means that exceeded their understanding. Attempts to locate the missing island through magical divination proved fruitless, as the Psijics had shielded their new location against all conventional forms of detection. The government's magical advisors concluded that the island had either been destroyed in some catastrophic magical accident or had been moved to a location beyond their ability to discover during their absence from the world. Artaeum existed in what the Psijics termed a parallel adjacency, a state of existence that remained connected to normal reality through subtle dimensional channels, while being effectively isolated from direct interaction. The island continued to experience the passage of time, though at a rate that could be adjusted according to the needs of its inhabitants. The Psijics used this temporal flexibility to accelerate their research and training, accomplishing centuries of work within compressed time frames. The parallel adjacency provided the Order with unprecedented opportunities for deep research into the fundamental nature of reality. Free from external distractions and political pressures, they could pursue lines of investigation that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The island's isolation allowed them to conduct experiments with temporal manipulation, spatial displacement, and probability alteration that might have had dangerous consequences if performed within normal space-time. The Psijics discovered that their displaced state provided unique perspectives on the nature of existence itself. From their position outside normal reality, they could observe the underlying structures that supported the world, perceiving the connections and relationships that remained invisible to beings trapped within conventional space-time. They developed new techniques for manipulating these fundamental structures and gained insights into the cosmic forces that governed the behavior of gods, mortals, and the physical world itself. The question of where exactly Artaeum existed during these periods of disappearance has been the subject of extensive speculation among scholars and mages. The Psijics themselves have provided only cryptic references to their location, describing it as existing between the spaces of what is and what might be, or in the pause between one moment and the next. These descriptions suggest that the island occupied a position outside normal dimensional categories, existing in a state that transcended conventional understanding of location and presence. Some theories propose that Artaeum was shifted into one of the adjacent dimensions that surround the mortal world, similar to the realms of oblivion, but without the defining characteristics that make those realms habitable only to Daedric entities. Others suggest that the island existed in a temporal loop, constantly cycling through the same moment, while remaining connected to the broader flow of history through carefully maintained channels. The most sophisticated theories propose that Artaeum achieved a state of quantum superposition, existing simultaneously in multiple possible locations until the Psijics chose to collapse these possibilities into a single, observable reality. The duration of Artaeum's first disappearance, over 5 centuries, allowed for significant developments in both the Order's capabilities and the broader political situation in Somerset. The Psijics used this extended period to train new generations of practitioners in techniques that had been developed during their isolation, creating a body of knowledge and capability that far exceeded what they had possessed before their departure. The absence also allowed tensions with the Altmer government to cool, as new political leaders emerged who were less concerned with controlling independent magical organizations. The decision to return Artaeum to normal reality was motivated by the Order's perception that cosmic forces were beginning to shift in ways that might require their intervention. Their observations from parallel adjacency had revealed growing instabilities in the fundamental structures that supported the world. Instabilities that could eventually threaten the continued existence of mortal civilization. The Psijics recognized that their period of isolation had served its purpose in preserving and developing their capabilities, but that their ultimate responsibility lay in maintaining cosmic stability rather than pursuing knowledge for its own sake. The process of returning Artaeum to the world required even greater precision than its original disappearance. The Psijics had to carefully re-establish all the spatial and temporal connections that linked the island to normal reality, while ensuring that the transition occurred smoothly enough to avoid disrupting either their own activities or the broader cosmic balance. The reintegration took place gradually over several months, with the island slowly becoming visible to external observers as its connections to normal spacetime were restored. The return of Artaeum created considerable excitement and concern throughout the magical community. Mages who had dismissed the Psijic Order as a historical curiosity were forced to acknowledge that the organization had not only survived, but had apparently grown stronger during their absence. The demonstration of their ability to remove an entire island from reality and then return it centuries later established their magical capabilities as far exceeding anything possessed by conventional practitioners. The Psijics' gradual re-engagement with the affairs of Tamriel during the Second Era reflected their recognition that the cosmic instabilities they had observed required careful monitoring and occasional intervention. However, their approach to this re-engagement differed significantly from their activities before their disappearance. Rather than maintaining a continuous presence in political affairs, they adopted a strategy of selective intervention, becoming involved only when events threatened to trigger consequences that could affect the fundamental stability of reality. This selective approach created a pattern of Psijic involvement that would characterize their activities throughout the Second Era. They would emerge from their island sanctuary to provide guidance during major crises, offer training to individuals whose development might prove crucial for cosmic stability, and occasionally intervene directly when magical or political developments threaten to spiral beyond mortal control. Between these interventions, they would withdraw to Artaeum to continue their research and prepare for future challenges. The Second Era saw several notable examples of Psijic intervention in Tamrielic affairs. They provided guidance to the early Mages Guild, sharing insights into magical theory and practice that helped establish the organization's foundational principles. They advised certain political leaders during periods of particular instability, offering perspectives that drew upon their extended temporal awareness and deep understanding of historical patterns. Most significantly, they began to train selected individuals from outside their order, recognizing that the challenges facing the world would require capabilities that extended beyond their own membership. The growing complexity of political and magical developments throughout Tamriel during the Second Era created increasing demands on Psijic attention and resources. The rise of new magical traditions, the emergence of powerful political entities, and the growing influence of Daedric cults all represented potential threats to cosmic stability that required careful monitoring. The Order found itself stretched thin as they attempted to track multiple developing situations while maintaining their own research and training activities. The situation reached another critical point in the late Second Era, when the Order's observations revealed that the cosmic instabilities they had been monitoring were approaching a threshold that could trigger catastrophic changes throughout the world. The specific nature of these instabilities involved the growing weakness of the barriers between different realms of existence, instabilities that could eventually allow uncontrolled incursions from oblivion or other dangerous dimensions. The Psijics recognized that addressing these threats would require their full attention and capabilities over an extended period. The decision to withdraw Artaeum from the world for a second time reflected the Order's assessment that the coming challenges would require them to focus entirely on developing new techniques and capabilities, rather than maintaining their current level of engagement with mortal affairs. The second disappearance followed the same basic principles as the first, though the Psijics had refined their techniques considerably during the intervening centuries. The island's withdrawal from normal reality occurred more smoothly and completely than before, leaving even fewer traces of its continued existence. The cyclical nature of the Psijic Order's relationship with linear time became apparent through the pattern established by these two great disappearances. The Order operated according to temporal rhythms that extended far beyond the normal concerns of mortal civilization, withdrawing from active engagement when their presence was not essential, and returning when cosmic forces required their intervention. This cyclical approach reflected their understanding that their ultimate purpose transcended the immediate needs of any particular era or civilization. The implications of this cyclical pattern extended beyond the Psijic order itself to influence the broader development of magical and philosophical thought throughout Tamriel. The knowledge that such an organization existed, with capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding and purposes that transcended normal political concerns, provided a constant reminder that reality contained depths and complexities that most mortals never suspected. The periodic appearances and disappearances of Artaeum served as demonstrations that the familiar world of everyday experience represented only the surface layer of a far more complex and mysterious cosmos. The cosmic instabilities that had driven the Psijic order into their second great withdrawal reached their catastrophic culmination with the initiation of the plane meld. Molag Bal's unprecedented attempt to merge his realm of Cold Harbor with the mortal world itself represented exactly the type of existential threat to reality's fundamental structure that the Order had been preparing to address during their centuries of isolation. The detection of massive dimensional rifts opening across Tamriel, combined with the systematic weakening of the barriers between planes, triggered immediate action from the Psijics, despite their official absence from the world. The Order's advanced temporal perception capabilities allowed them to recognize the true scope of the plane meld threat long before its effects became apparent to conventional observers. From their position in parallel adjacency, Psijic masters could perceive the gradual distortion of spatial relationships as Cold Harbor's influence began to seep into the mortal realm. The characteristic architecture of Molag Bal's realm, twisted spires of black stone, chains that defied gravitational logic, and structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, began manifesting in isolated locations across Tamriel months before the crisis became publicly acknowledged. The Daedric Prince's methodology involved the systematic placement of dark anchors throughout Tamriel, each serving as a focal point for dimensional manipulation that gradually weakened the barriers between planes. These massive chains, forged from materials that existed partially in both realms, created stable connection points that allowed Cold Harbor's influence to spread into the surrounding areas. The anchors themselves defied conventional understanding, appearing as enormous chains that descended from tears in the sky, while their lower ends terminated in complex mechanical assemblies that burrow deep into the earth. The emergence of the vestige as a crucial figure in the developing crisis created unique opportunities for Psijic intervention. This individual, whose soul had been stolen by Molag Bal and subsequently recovered through extraordinary circumstances, possessed characteristics that made them particularly suitable for receiving Psijic guidance. The vestige's unique metaphysical status existing simultaneously as a mortal being and as a whole in reality where their soul had been, created sensitivities to dimensional manipulation that aligned with Psijic perceptual techniques. Psijic masters began appearing to the vestige at critical moments throughout their journey, providing guidance that seemed to emerge from nowhere while avoiding direct involvement in combat or political decision-making. These interventions typically manifested as brief consultations where robed figures would materialize through subtle spatial distortions, offer cryptic advice or warnings, and disappear before their presence could attract unwanted attention. The advice itself was carefully crafted to guide the vestige toward optimal choices without compromising their agency or revealing the full extent of Psijic knowledge about the developing situation. The Order's approach to these interventions reflected their deep understanding of probability manipulation and temporal mechanics. Rather than providing direct solutions to problems, Psijic advisors would offer information or perspectives that increased the likelihood of favorable outcomes, while allowing events to develop according to their natural patterns. A master might warn the vestige about a particular danger without specifying its exact nature, or suggest investigating a seemingly unrelated location that would prove crucial to understanding a larger pattern. The challenge of maintaining operational security while providing meaningful assistance required the development of new techniques for discrete intervention. Psijic masters learned to manifest their presence in ways that appeared coincidental to external observers, while remaining clearly intentional to their intended recipients. They might appear as travelers encountered on remote roads, scholars researching in libraries where the vestige happened to be studying, or mysterious figures glimpsed briefly during moments of particular significance. The selection and training of potential recruits during this period reflected the Order's recognition that the challenges facing the world would require capabilities that extended beyond their current membership. The crisis had revealed individuals throughout Tamriel who possessed the combination of magical sensitivity, intellectual curiosity, and moral integrity necessary for Psijic training. However, the Order's recruitment efforts needed to remain subtle enough to avoid attracting attention from the various political and military factions involved in the broader conflict. The recruitment process typically began with careful observation of potential candidates over extended periods. Psijic masters would monitor individuals who demonstrated unusual magical abilities, showed interest in philosophical questions that transcended immediate practical concerns, or displayed the type of wisdom and restraint that suggested compatibility with Psijic principles. This observation phase could last for months or years, allowing the Order to assess not just the candidate's abilities, but their character, motivations, and potential for growth. Initial contact with promising candidates occurred through seemingly chance encounters that provided opportunities for subtle evaluation. A Psijic master might appear as a fellow traveler who engaged the candidate in philosophical discussions, testing their responses to complex moral and metaphysical questions. These conversations served multiple purposes, allowing the order to assess the candidate's thinking while providing initial exposure to Psijic concepts and perspectives. The diversity of candidates selected during this period reflected the order's recognition that wisdom and magical potential existed across all the races and cultures of Tamriel. The crisis had demonstrated that effective response to cosmic threats required perspectives and capabilities that could not be found within any single cultural tradition. Psijic recruitment efforts identified promising individuals among Nords whose connection to ancient traditions provided insights into temporal manipulation. Redguards, whose sword-singing practices revealed understanding of reality's fundamental vibrations. And Khajiit, whose lunar mysticism offered unique approaches to dimensional perception. The training of new recruits during the crisis period required adaptation of traditional Psijic educational methods to accommodate the urgent need for capable practitioners. The normal centuries-long development process was compressed through the use of advanced temporal manipulation techniques, allowing students to experience extended periods of training within compressed time frames. These accelerated programs maintained the depth and thoroughness of traditional Psijic education, while producing competent practitioners within the timeframes required by the developing crisis. The integration of new members from diverse backgrounds enriched the Order's understanding of magical theory and practice. Each cultural tradition brought unique perspectives and techniques that enhanced the collective knowledge base. Nord recruits contributed insights into the relationship between voice and reality that complemented existing Psijic understanding of vibrational magic. Dunmer candidates offered knowledge of ancestor worship and spirit communication that provided new approaches to consciousness manipulation. Imperial scholars brought systematic analytical methods that helped codify and preserve traditional Psijic techniques. The Order's careful balance between intervention and neutrality became increasingly challenging as the plane meld crisis intensified. The Three Banners War, which provided the political and military context for much of the resistance to Molag Bal's invasion, created complex situations where Psijic assistance to one faction might inadvertently benefit their enemies. The Order needed to provide guidance that served the broader goal of preventing dimensional collapse, while avoiding actions that would significantly alter the balance of power among the competing political factions. This balancing act required sophisticated understanding of the interconnections between different aspects of the crisis. The Psijics recognized that the political conflict among the three alliances served Molag Bal's purposes by preventing coordinated resistance to the plane meld. while simultaneously providing the chaos and conflict that strengthened his influence over the mortal world. However, direct intervention to end the political conflict would have compromised the Order's neutrality and potentially created new problems that could prove equally dangerous. The solution involved providing assistance that strengthened resistance to the plane meld without significantly affecting the military balance among the competing factions. Psijic masters would provide guidance that helped all three alliances develop more effective responses to Daedric incursions, while avoiding advice that would give any faction decisive advantages over their mortal enemies. This approach required careful coordination among multiple Psijic agents operating simultaneously across different theaters of conflict. The establishment of communication networks among resistance forces represented one area where Psijic assistance proved particularly valuable. The Order's mastery of spatial manipulation allowed them to create secure communication channels that connected key figures across vast distances without relying on conventional magical or mundane methods. These networks enabled coordination of anti-plane meld activities while remaining invisible to both Daedric surveillance and rival faction intelligence operations. The development of countermeasures against dark anchor deployment required extensive research into the dimensional mechanics underlying Molag Bal's invasion strategy. Psijic masters worked closely with Mages Guild researchers to understand how the anchors created stable connections between planes and to develop techniques for disrupting these connections. This collaboration represented one of the most direct forms of assistance the Order provided during the crisis, though their involvement remained largely invisible to participants outside the highest levels of the Guild leadership. The research revealed that dark anchors operated by creating resonance patterns that synchronize the vibrational frequencies of Cold Harbor and the mortal world within localized areas. These resonance fields gradually expanded outward from each anchor point, slowly converting the surrounding reality to match Cold Harbor's dimensional characteristics. The process was irreversible once it reached critical thresholds, making early detection and intervention crucial for preventing permanent dimensional damage. The countermeasures developed through this collaboration involved techniques for disrupting the resonance patterns before they could reach critical stability. Specialized magical formulations could interfere with the anchor's synchronization mechanisms, while properly trained practitioners could manipulate the local dimensional characteristics to resist Cold Harbor's influence. The implementation of these countermeasures required precise timing and coordination, as premature or poorly executed interventions could potentially accelerate the dimensional conversion process. The training of resistance fighters in these specialized techniques required the development of simplified versions of advanced Psijic methods. The Order's masters created instructional programs that could teach the essential principles of dimensional manipulation to conventional mages within compressed time frames. These programs focused on practical applications rather than theoretical understanding, providing participants with the specific skills needed to combat dark anchor deployment without requiring them to master the broader philosophical framework underlying Psijic practice. The psychological challenges faced by individuals involved in anti-plane meld operations created additional opportunities for Psijic assistance. The constant exposure to dimensional distortions, daedric influence, and the fundamental wrongness of reality being forcibly merged with Cold Harbor created severe mental and spiritual stress among resistance fighters. The Order's understanding of consciousness manipulation and spiritual healing proved invaluable for helping these individuals maintain their effectiveness and sanity throughout the extended crisis. Psijic healing techniques addressed not just the immediate symptoms of dimensional exposure, but the underlying spiritual damage caused by prolonged contact with daedric influence. The masters developed specialized meditation practices that could cleanse consciousness of Cold Harbor's corrupting effects, while strengthening the practitioner's resistance to future exposure. These techniques were adapted for use by individuals without extensive magical training, allowing them to be distributed widely among resistance forces. The Order's temporal manipulation capabilities provided crucial intelligence about the likely development of the crisis and the effectiveness of various response strategies. Psijic masters could observe multiple potential timelines simultaneously, assessing the probable outcomes of different approaches and identifying the actions most likely to prevent catastrophic failure. This intelligence was provided to key decision-makers through carefully orchestrated encounters that appeared coincidental, while delivering precisely the information needed for optimal strategic planning. The complexity of managing multiple simultaneous interventions while maintaining operational security required the development of new organizational structures within the Order. Traditional Psijic hierarchy, based on individual mastery and wisdom, proved insufficient for coordinating the complex, multifaceted response required by the crisis. The Order established temporary operational units that combined members with complementary specializations, creating teams capable of addressing specific aspects of the broader challenge. These operational units functioned with considerable autonomy, allowing them to respond quickly to developing situations without requiring approval from the central leadership. The units maintained coordination through specialized communication techniques that operated outside normal space-time, ensuring that information could be shared instantly across vast distances without creating detectable magical signatures. This organizational flexibility proved essential for maintaining effective response capabilities throughout the extended duration of the crisis. The gradual resolution of the plane meld crisis through the combined efforts of the Vestige, the Alliance forces, and various other resistance groups validated the Psijic approach of providing guidance and support while allowing events to develop according to their natural patterns. The Order's interventions had been crucial for preventing several potential catastrophic failures, while avoiding actions that would have fundamentally altered the course of events. The success demonstrated that their traditional principles of wisdom, restraint, and selective intervention remained effective, even when facing unprecedented threats to reality itself. The resolution of the Plainmeld crisis marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of Psijic organizational structure, as the Order recognized that their traditional methods of leadership and decision-making required adaptation to address the increasingly complex challenges facing the world. The role of Rightmaster, which had developed organically from Iacus's position as the most experienced practitioner, needed to be formalized into a more structured system capable of guiding an organization whose responsibilities now extended far beyond the contemplative study that had originally defined their purpose. The position of Rightmaster represents the culmination of centuries of spiritual and intellectual development within the Psijic tradition. Unlike conventional leadership roles that derive authority from political appointment or hereditary succession, the Rightmaster achieves their position through demonstrated mastery of the deepest principles underlying Psijic practice. The selection process involves not formal elections or appointments, but the gradual recognition by the entire Order that a particular individual has achieved the level of understanding and wisdom necessary to guide their collective efforts. Iacus established the fundamental characteristics that would define the Rightmaster role throughout the Order's history. His approach to leadership emphasized guidance rather than command, wisdom rather than authority, and the cultivation of understanding rather than the enforcement of obedience. The Rightmaster serves as a living embodiment of Psijic principles, demonstrating through their actions and decisions the practical application of the philosophical insights that guide the Order's existence. The Rightmaster must maintain awareness of the Order's research activities, ensuring that investigations into dangerous or sensitive topics proceed with appropriate caution while avoiding the stagnation that would result from excessive conservatism. They oversee the training and development of new members, making final decisions about advancement through the various ranks and determining when individuals have achieved sufficient understanding to be trusted with the Order's most closely guarded secrets. Perhaps most crucially, the Rightmaster serves as the Order's primary interface with the temporal and spatial forces that govern cosmic stability. Their expanded consciousness allows them to perceive patterns and connections that remain invisible to less developed practitioners, providing early warning of potential threats to reality's fundamental structure. This responsibility requires the right master to maintain constant vigilance, monitoring the subtle indicators that might signal developing crises, while distinguishing between natural fluctuations and genuinely dangerous instabilities. The transition from Iacosis to subsequent Rite Masters established precedents that would govern the Order's leadership succession throughout their history. Iacosis' recognition that his individual perspective, however expanded, remained limited by his particular experiences and understanding, led him to develop methods for ensuring smooth transitions between leaders. Rather than attempting to designate a specific successor, he established processes through which the most qualified individual would naturally emerge as the consensus choice of the entire order. The organizational structure beneath the Rite Master reflects the order's understanding that wisdom develops through stages that cannot be rushed or bypassed. The progression from initiate through the various intermediate ranks to the ultimate achievement of sage status represents not merely the accumulation of knowledge or the development of magical abilities, but the fundamental transformation of consciousness that allows practitioners to perceive and interact with reality according to Psijic principles. Initiates represent individuals who have demonstrated the basic qualifications necessary for Psijic training, but have not yet begun the deep transformation required for full membership in the order. The initiate stage typically lasts several decades, during which candidates learn the fundamental techniques of meditation, perception, and magical manipulation that form the foundation of all advanced Psijic practice. The training emphasizes direct experience over theoretical study, with initiates spending extensive periods in contemplative practice designed to expand their awareness beyond the limitations of ordinary consciousness. The transition from initiate to the rank of acolyte marks the first major milestone in Psijic development, indicating that the practitioner has achieved sufficient expansion of consciousness to begin working with the deeper principles that govern reality. Acolytes gain access to more advanced training materials and begin participating in the Order's research activities, though always under careful supervision by more experienced practitioners. The Acolyte stage focuses on developing the specific skills and understanding necessary for independent practice, with particular emphasis on learning to perceive the subtle connections between apparently unrelated phenomena. The rank of Adept represents mastery of the fundamental Psijic techniques and understanding of the basic principles that guide the Order's activities. Adepts typically specialize in particular areas of study or practice, developing expertise in temporal manipulation, spatial displacement, consciousness alteration, or other advanced disciplines. The achievement of Adept status grants significant independence in research and practice, though major decisions still require consultation with more senior practitioners. Adepts often serve as instructors for lower-ranked members, sharing their specialized knowledge while continuing their own development. The progression to the rank of master indicates that the practitioner has achieved sufficient understanding to work independently with the most advanced Psijic techniques while maintaining the wisdom and restraint necessary to avoid dangerous mistakes. Masters typically lead research projects, oversee training programs, and serve as advisors to the Order's leadership on matters within their areas of expertise. The master rank carries significant responsibility for maintaining the Order's standards and traditions, while adapting to changing circumstances and new challenges. The achievement of Sage status represents the culmination of Psijic development, indicating that the practitioner has transcended the limitations that constrain ordinary consciousness, while maintaining the practical ability to function effectively in normal reality. Sages possess the expanded awareness necessary to perceive the deepest patterns that govern existence, combined with the wisdom to understand how this knowledge should be applied. Only sages are considered qualified to serve as Rite Master, though not all sages choose to pursue the additional responsibilities that leadership entails. The selection processes for new members reflect the Order's understanding that Psijic training requires individuals who possess not only intellectual capability and magical potential, but the specific combination of curiosity, humility, and moral integrity necessary for safe development of advanced abilities. The recruitment process begins with careful observation of potential candidates over extended periods, allowing the Order to assess not just their apparent qualifications, but their character, motivations, and capacity for growth. The initial identification of promising candidates typically occurs through the Order's ongoing monitoring of magical and intellectual developments throughout Tamriel. Psijic observers maintain awareness of individuals who demonstrate unusual abilities, show interest in philosophical questions that transcend immediate practical concerns, or display the type of wisdom and restraint that suggests compatibility with Psijic principles. This observation phase can last for years, allowing the Order to develop comprehensive understanding of each candidate's strengths, limitations, and potential for development. Contact with potential recruits occurs through carefully orchestrated encounters designed to appear coincidental, while providing opportunities for subtle evaluation. These initial meetings typically involve philosophical discussions that allow Psijic representatives to assess the candidate's thinking, while providing exposure to concepts and perspectives that might stimulate further development. The conversations serve multiple purposes, testing the candidate's intellectual flexibility while gauging their emotional stability and moral foundation. The formal invitation to join the order occurs only after extensive evaluation and unanimous agreement among the relevant decision makers. Candidates who receive invitations undergo additional testing designed to confirm their suitability for Psijic training, while providing them with realistic understanding of what membership entails. These tests typically involve exposure to controlled versions of the consciousness expanding experiences that form the core of Psijic practice, allowing candidates to assess their own readiness for the transformative journey ahead. The training processes for new members combine traditional Psijic educational methods with innovations developed to address the specific needs and backgrounds of individual students. The curriculum emphasizes direct experience over theoretical study, with students spending extensive periods in meditative practice designed to expand their awareness and develop their sensitivity to the subtle forces that govern reality. The progression through different levels of understanding occurs at the natural pace of each individual's development, with advancement based on demonstrated achievement rather than arbitrary time requirements. The philosophical examinations required for advancement through the various ranks test not only the candidate's intellectual understanding, but their practical wisdom and emotional maturity. These examinations typically involve complex scenarios that require the application of Psijic principles to challenging situations, testing the candidate's ability to maintain balance between competing considerations while making decisions that serve the greater good. The scenarios often involve moral dilemmas that have no clear solutions, requiring candidates to demonstrate the type of nuanced thinking that characterizes advanced Psijic practice. The trials associated with each level of advancement become increasingly demanding as students progress through the ranks, reflecting the growing responsibilities and capabilities that accompany higher levels of development. Early trials focus on basic competency in fundamental techniques, while advanced examinations require demonstration of abilities that could prove dangerous if misused. The most advanced trials involve direct exposure to the cosmic forces that the Order exists to monitor and protect, testing not only the candidate's technical abilities, but their wisdom, restraint, and commitment to Psijic principles. The integration of new members from diverse cultural backgrounds has enriched the Order's understanding, while creating challenges for traditional training methods. The incorporation of perspectives from Nordic, Redguard, Khajiit, and other traditions has led to the development of specialized training tracks that accommodate different approaches to consciousness development, while maintaining the essential characteristics of Psijic education. These adaptations have strengthened the Order's overall capabilities, while preserving the unity of purpose that defines their collective identity. The ongoing evolution of Psijic organizational structure reflects their recognition That effective response to cosmic threats requires both stability and flexibility. The traditional emphasis on individual development and contemplative study remains central to their identity, while new organizational innovations provide the coordination and specialization necessary for addressing complex challenges. This balance between tradition and adaptation ensures that the Order can maintain their essential character while evolving to meet the changing needs of their cosmic responsibilities. The organizational sophistication that emerged from centuries of careful development enabled the Psijic Order to fulfill one of their most crucial responsibilities: the identification, containment, and protection of artifacts whose power exceeded safe limits for conventional handling. This role evolved naturally from their understanding of cosmic forces and their recognition that certain magical items possessed the potential to destabilize reality itself if allowed to fall into unprepared hands. The Order's approach to artifact management reflected their broader philosophy, emphasizing understanding over control and protection over possession. Throughout their long history, the Psijics have encountered numerous artifacts of extraordinary power and danger. Ancient relics from forgotten civilizations, weapons forged by divine beings, and items created through magical experiments that pushed beyond the boundaries of safe practice, all found their way into Psijic custody. The Order developed sophisticated protocols for evaluating these items, determining which could be safely studied, which required permanent containment, and which posed such extreme dangers that they needed to be destroyed entirely. The establishment of containment facilities on Artaeum required the development of entirely new architectural and magical techniques. The containment chambers existed partially outside normal space-time, utilizing the island's unique dimensional properties to create storage areas that were effectively unreachable from conventional reality. These chambers incorporated multiple redundant containment systems, ensuring that even if one layer of protection failed, the artifacts would remain safely isolated from potential misuse. The relationship between the Psijic Order and other organizations throughout Tamriel created both opportunities and challenges that tested their traditional principles of neutrality and non-interference. The Order's unique position as guardians of cosmic stability placed them at the intersection of numerous competing interests, requiring careful navigation of alliances and conflicts that could significantly impact their ability to fulfill their primary responsibilities. The philosophical differences that had originally driven them to seek isolation on Artaeum became increasingly relevant as they encountered organizations whose approaches to magic, knowledge, and power differed fundamentally from their own principles. The relationship between the Psijic Order and the Thalmor represented perhaps the most complex and dangerous of these factional interactions. The ideological chasm between the two organizations extended far beyond simple political disagreements to encompass fundamental differences in their understanding of reality, purpose, and the proper role of advanced magical practitioners in the cosmic order. The Thalmor's pursuit of what they termed the purification of reality through the elimination of mortal limitations stood in direct opposition to the Psijic understanding that such limitations served essential functions in maintaining cosmic stability. The Thalmor's interpretation of ancient Altmer philosophy emphasized the superiority of elven consciousness over the perceived corruption introduced by mortal existence. Their political and magical agenda aimed at restoring what they believed to be the original state of reality, where elven spirits existed as pure manifestations of divine will, unencumbered by the physical limitations imposed by the mortal world. This goal required the systematic elimination of influences they considered corrupting, including the worship of Talos, the mixing of elven and human bloodlines, and most significantly, the acceptance of mortality as a natural condition rather than a temporary aberration to be overcome. The Psijic Order's rejection of this ideology stemmed from their deeper understanding of the relationship between limitation and transcendence. Their centuries of research into consciousness expansion and reality manipulation had revealed that the limitations imposed by mortal existence served as essential training grounds for developing the wisdom and restraint necessary for safely handling cosmic forces. The Thalmor approach of attempting to bypass these developmental stages through ideological purity and political control represented exactly the type of dangerous shortcut that the Psijics had learned to avoid through bitter experience. The practical implications of this philosophical conflict became apparent through the Thalmor's attempts to recruit Psijic cooperation in their various schemes. The Thalmor leadership recognized that the Order's advanced capabilities could prove invaluable for achieving their goals, particularly their mastery over temporal manipulation and dimensional displacement. However, every attempt at alliance or cooperation foundered on the fundamental incompatibility between Thalmor ideology and Psijic principles, creating a relationship characterized by mutual suspicion and carefully managed hostility. The Order's relationship with the Mages Guild represented a far more positive but equally complex set of interactions that had evolved over centuries of mutual influence and cooperation. The Guild's establishment during the Second Era had been significantly influenced by Psijic insights into magical theory and practice, though the organization that emerged differed substantially from what the Order might have created if left to develop their own educational institutions. The Guild's emphasis on standardized magical education and regulated practice reflected practical necessities for training large numbers of practitioners, but it also created limitations that sometimes frustrated more advanced students seeking deeper understanding. The founder's role as the guild's creator established a direct connection between the two organizations that persisted long after his death. His exposure to Psijic teachings during his youth had provided him with insights into magical theory that informed his approach to guild organization and curriculum development. However, his recognition that most students lacked the philosophical preparation necessary for traditional Psijic training led him to develop simplified approaches that could be taught to larger numbers of practitioners within reasonable timeframes. The standardization of magical education through the guild system created both opportunities and challenges for Psijic influence on magical development throughout Tamriel. The guild schools provided basic training that prepared students for more advanced study, creating a larger pool of potential candidates for Psijic recruitment. However, the emphasis on formulaic approaches to magical practice sometimes created mental habits that made it difficult for students to adapt to the more fluid and intuitive methods favored by the order. The challenge for Psijic instructors working with guild-trained students involved helping them unlearn rigid thinking patterns while building upon the solid foundation of basic competencies they had already acquired. The Order's occasional provision of advanced training to selected guild members created opportunities for sharing knowledge while maintaining appropriate boundaries around their most sensitive techniques. These training programs typically focused on theoretical understanding rather than practical applications, providing guild scholars with insights into magical principles that could inform their research and teaching without giving them access to capabilities that might prove dangerous if misused. The programs also served as recruitment opportunities, allowing the Order to identify individuals whose development might benefit from more extensive Psijic training. The relationship between the two organizations became particularly complex during periods when political pressures affected guild operations. The Thalmor's increasing influence over magical education in areas under Dominion control created situations where guild members found themselves caught between competing loyalties and conflicting approaches to magical practice. The Order's traditional neutrality prevented them from directly opposing political control over guild activities, but they could provide alternative perspectives and training opportunities for guild members seeking to expand their understanding beyond officially sanctioned limits. The development of magical theory through guild research programs often intersected with areas of Psijic expertise, creating opportunities for collaborative investigation while raising questions about the appropriate sharing of dangerous knowledge. The Order's approach to these collaborations emphasized providing guidance and perspective rather than direct participation, helping guild researchers understand the implications of their work while allowing them to maintain independence in their investigations. This approach proved particularly valuable when guild research touched on areas that might have cosmic implications, such as investigations into Daedric influence or experiments with dimensional manipulation. The Order's stance regarding Daedric cults and their activities reflected their understanding of the cosmic balance that maintains stability between different realms of existence. Unlike many religious and political organizations that viewed all Daedric influence as inherently evil, the Psijics recognized that the Daedric princes served essential functions in maintaining the cosmic order, even when their individual activities might prove harmful to mortal interests. This nuanced perspective allowed them to distinguish between normal Daedric influence and activities that threatened fundamental stability, focusing their interventions on situations where cosmic balance was genuinely at risk. The assessment of Daedric threats required sophisticated understanding of the relationships between different princes and their respective spheres of influence. The Order's research had revealed that certain combinations of Daedric activity could create resonance effects that amplified their individual influences beyond normal limits, potentially destabilizing the barriers between realms or creating opportunities for unprecedented incursions into the mortal world. The detection of these dangerous combinations required constant monitoring of cult activities throughout Tamriel, analyzing patterns that might not become apparent to conventional observers until the situation had already reached critical stages. The Plainmeld crisis represented the type of existential threat that justified direct Psijic intervention against Daedric activities. The prince's attempt to merge Cold Harbor with the mortal world threatened to fundamentally alter the structure of reality itself, creating changes that would have affected not only mortal civilization, but the cosmic balance that maintained stability across all realms. The Order's response to this crisis established precedents for future interventions while demonstrating their willingness to oppose even the most powerful Daedric princes when cosmic stability was at stake. The distinction between acceptable and unacceptable Daedric influence created complex ethical and practical challenges for Order members operating in areas where cult activities were common. The normal activities of most Daedric cults, while often harmful to individual mortals or local communities, typically remained within the bounds of natural cosmic variation and therefore did not warrant Psijic intervention. However, certain types of ritual activity or artifact usage could create cumulative effects that might eventually threaten broader stability, requiring careful assessment of when intervention became necessary. The Order's approach to Daedric cult management typically involved monitoring and analysis rather than direct confrontation, intervening only when activities reached thresholds that posed genuine threats to cosmic balance. This approach required the development of sophisticated criteria for evaluating cult activities, distinguishing between normal religious practice and genuinely dangerous magical operations. The criteria considered not only the immediate effects of cult activities, but their potential for creating cascading consequences that might affect fundamental cosmic structures. The relationship between the Psijic order and other mystical organizations throughout Tamriel created opportunities for philosophical exchange, while highlighting the diversity of approaches to understanding cosmic forces. The Moth Priests of the Imperial City represented one of the most significant of these relationships, as their unique abilities to read the Elder Scrolls provided them with access to knowledge that complemented Psijic understanding of temporal mechanics and cosmic structure. The collaboration between the two organizations proved mutually beneficial, with each group contributing insights that enhanced the other's understanding of their respective specializations. The Moth Priest's approach to prophetic knowledge differed significantly from Psijic temporal manipulation, focusing on the interpretation of predetermined patterns rather than the active manipulation of temporal flows. This difference in methodology created opportunities for comparing different approaches to understanding time and causality, leading to insights that neither organization might have achieved independently. The collaboration also provided safeguards against the dangers inherent in both approaches, as the priest's understanding of prophetic patterns could warn against Psijic temporal manipulations that might have unintended consequences, while Psijic analysis could help interpret Elder Scroll prophecies that might otherwise remain incomprehensible. The practical aspects of collaboration between the two organizations required careful coordination of their respective security protocols and operational procedures. The Moth Priest's blindness, which resulted from their exposure to Elder Scroll knowledge, created unique challenges for communication and cooperation, while the Psijics' temporal perception abilities sometimes made it difficult for them to interact with individuals whose consciousness remained fixed in linear time. The development of specialized communication techniques and meeting protocols allowed both groups to share information effectively, while accommodating their respective limitations and capabilities. The philosophical differences between the organizations created interesting points of comparison and debate, particularly regarding questions of predestination versus free will. The Moth Priest's interpretation of Elder Scroll prophecies suggested that certain events were fixed and inevitable, while Psijic understanding of temporal mechanics indicated that conscious intervention could alter the course of events even when they appeared predetermined. The resolution of this apparent contradiction required sophisticated understanding of the relationship between different levels of causality and the ways in which prophetic knowledge interacted with temporal manipulation. The Greybeards of High Hrothgar represented another significant relationship for the Order, though one characterized more by mutual respect and philosophical compatibility than active collaboration. The Nordic masters' approach to understanding reality through the power of voice and their emphasis on patient contemplation and wisdom resonated strongly with Psijic principles, creating natural affinity between the two organizations, despite their very different cultural backgrounds and specific techniques. The philosophical overlap between Greybeard and Psijic teachings centered on their shared understanding that true power required wisdom and restraint rather than mere technical capability. Both organizations emphasized the importance of understanding the deeper principles underlying their respective practices, recognizing that the most dangerous mistakes often resulted from the application of powerful techniques without sufficient understanding of their implications. This shared perspective created opportunities for meaningful exchange, despite the significant differences in their specific approaches to magical and spiritual development. The practical differences between the two traditions provided opportunities for mutual learning and enhancement of understanding. The Greybeard's mastery of voice-based reality manipulation offered insights into the relationship between consciousness and physical manifestation that complemented Psijic research into spatial and temporal displacement. Conversely, Psijic understanding of dimensional mechanics provided perspectives on the cosmic implications of voice-based magic that enhanced Greybeard understanding of their own techniques. The limited nature of Greybeard engagement with worldly affairs created both opportunities and challenges for collaboration with the Order. The Nordic Masters' commitment to isolation and contemplation aligned with traditional Psijic approaches to neutrality and non-interference, but it also limited the practical applications of their shared insights. Collaboration typically remained at the level of philosophical exchange rather than coordinated action. Though both organizations maintained mutual respect and occasional consultation on matters of cosmic significance, the maintenance of relationships between various mystical organizations created a foundation that would prove essential when the Psijic Order confronted the ultimate implications of their centuries-long pursuit of understanding. The network of knowledge and capability that had developed through careful collaboration with groups like the Moth Priests and Greybeards provided crucial context for comprehending the true scope of what the Order had been approaching through their most advanced practices. The Psijic endeavor, known in their most ancient and carefully guarded texts by the designation Chim, represented not merely another magical technique or philosophical concept, but the complete transformation of individual consciousness into something that transcended the fundamental categories that define mortal existence. The ultimate goal of the Psijic endeavor extends far beyond the conventional understanding of spiritual advancement or magical mastery. Where most mystical traditions seek to enhance the practitioner's capabilities within the existing framework of reality, the endeavor aims at the complete dissolution of the barriers that separate individual consciousness from the cosmic forces that govern existence itself. This transformation requires the practitioner to abandon every assumption about the nature of identity, causality, and the relationship between observer and observed, achieving a state of awareness that encompasses the totality of existence, while maintaining the coherence necessary for continued function. The philosophical foundations underlying this ultimate goal emerged from the Order's recognition that conventional approaches to consciousness expansion remain trapped within the limitations imposed by dualistic thinking. Most practitioners, even those who achieved considerable advancement, continued to perceive reality as composed of separate entities interacting through external relationships. The endeavor teaches that this separation represents a fundamental illusion created by the constraints of ordinary perception, and that true understanding requires the complete dissolution of these artificial boundaries. The relationship between the Psijic endeavor and the concept of mantling reveals crucial insights into the nature of divine consciousness and the mechanisms through which mortals might achieve transcendence. Mantling, as understood by conventional magical theory, involves the assumption of divine roles through the systematic adoption of the characteristics and behaviors associated with particular deities. The process typically requires the practitioner to so completely embody the essence of a chosen divine figure that reality itself begins to recognize them as that deity, eventually resulting in their transformation into a genuine divine entity. The Psijic understanding of mantling differs significantly from these conventional interpretations, recognizing the process as fundamentally limited by its dependence on existing divine patterns. The practitioner who achieves divinity through mantling becomes constrained by the very characteristics that define their chosen divine role, trading mortal limitations for divine ones, without achieving the complete transcendence that represents the true goal of spiritual development. The endeavor teaches that genuine transcendence requires moving beyond all predetermined patterns, including divine ones, to achieve a state of consciousness that remains unlimited by any external definitions or constraints. The concept of Chim represents a more sophisticated approach to transcendence that shares certain characteristics with the Psijic endeavor. While differing in crucial respects, Chim involves the recognition that individual consciousness and cosmic consciousness are identical, combined with the paradoxical maintenance of individual identity despite this recognition of unity. The practitioner who achieves Chim gains the ability to reshape reality through pure will, limited only by their wisdom and understanding of the consequences of their actions. The Psijic approach to Chim emphasizes the preparatory work necessary for safely navigating the psychological and metaphysical challenges inherent in this level of realization. The Order's centuries of research into consciousness manipulation and reality alteration had revealed that most attempts to achieve Chim failed because practitioners lacked the foundational understanding necessary for maintaining coherence during the dissolution of ego boundaries. The traditional Psijic training process, with its emphasis on gradual development and careful preparation, provided the stability necessary for surviving the transition to Chim consciousness. However, the Order's most advanced practitioners recognize that even Chim represented an intermediate stage rather than the ultimate goal of consciousness development. The practitioner who achieved Chim remained bound by the fundamental structure of reality, capable of manipulating its contents, but unable to transcend the basic framework that defined existence itself. The Psijic endeavor aimed at a level of realization that transcended even these limitations, achieving a state of consciousness that existed beyond all categories and definitions. The Order's understanding of the Godhead and the dream provided the cosmological framework necessary for comprehending the ultimate implications of the endeavor. Their research had revealed that all existence, from the most basic physical phenomena to the highest levels of divine consciousness, represented manifestations within a cosmic dream experienced by an entity whose nature transcended all conventional understanding. This Godhead existed in a state of unconscious dreaming, with all apparent reality representing the contents of its dream rather than independently existing phenomena. The recognition that existence itself represented a dream state rather than fundamental reality created profound implications for understanding the nature of consciousness and identity. If all phenomena, including individual awareness, represented temporary patterns within the Godhead's dream, then the conventional understanding of personal identity and individual achievement became meaningless. The practitioner who truly understood this relationship faced the choice between accepting their role as a dream figure or attempting to transcend the dream entirely through the achievement of independent consciousness. The Order's role in preventing the dissolution of reality through the actions of those who would achieve amaranth represented one of their most crucial but least understood responsibilities. Amaranth, the state of consciousness that transcended even the Godhead's dream, represented the ultimate goal of the most advanced mystical practitioners throughout history. The achievement of amaranth consciousness allowed the practitioner to escape the cosmic dream entirely, creating their own independent reality that existed parallel to, but separate from, the original cosmic structure. While the achievement of amaranth represented the ultimate spiritual accomplishment from the perspective of individual development. Its implications for the continued existence of the original reality created complex ethical and practical challenges. Each successful transition to amaranth consciousness potentially weakened the stability of the cosmic dream, as the departure of advanced consciousness from the system reduced the total awareness available for maintaining its coherence. The Order's calculations suggested that too many simultaneous transitions to Amaranth could potentially cause the collapse of the entire cosmic structure, ending the existence of all beings who remained within the original reality. The prevention of premature or poorly prepared attempts at Amaranth transcendence required the Order to develop sophisticated methods for identifying individuals whose spiritual development approached these dangerous thresholds. The detection process involved monitoring the subtle changes in local reality that occurred around practitioners whose consciousness began to transcend normal limitations. These changes typically manifested as increasing synchronicity in events surrounding the individual, gradual breakdown of causal relationships in their immediate environment, and growing difficulty for other beings to maintain stable interactions with them. The intervention techniques developed for managing potential Amaranth candidates required extraordinary delicacy and precision, as direct interference could potentially trigger exactly the type of reality collapse the Order sought to prevent. The approach typically involved providing alternative paths for continued development that satisfied the practitioner's spiritual needs, while redirecting their progress away from full Amaranth transcendence. These alternatives often involve training in cosmic maintenance responsibilities, channeling the practitioner's advanced capabilities toward preserving and enhancing the stability of existing reality, rather than transcending it entirely. The theoretical connections between Psijic practices and the Dwemer's attempts to transcend mortality revealed crucial insights into the dangers inherent in pursuing transcendence through purely technological or rational approaches. The Dwemer's disappearance during the Battle of Red Mountain represented one of history's most dramatic examples of an entire civilization attempting to achieve transcendence through methods that bypass the gradual development of wisdom and understanding that characterized traditional mystical approaches. The Order's analysis of surviving Dwemer research and artifacts revealed that their approach to transcendence focused on the manipulation of fundamental forces through technological means, rather than the consciousness development that formed the foundation of Psijic practice. The Dwemer had developed sophisticated understanding of the relationship between sound, vibration, and reality manipulation, creating devices that could alter the basic properties of matter and energy through precisely controlled acoustic effects. Their ultimate goal involved using these technologies to transform their entire race into a form of existence that transcended the limitations of physical manifestation. The fundamental difference between the Dwemer approach and Psijic methods lay in their respective understanding of the relationship between consciousness and reality. The Dwemer treated consciousness as an emergent property of complex physical systems that could be manipulated through technological intervention, while the Psijics understood consciousness as the fundamental substrate from which all physical phenomena emerged. This philosophical difference led to dramatically different approaches to transcendence, with the Dwemer seeking to escape physical limitations through technological transformation, while the Psijics aimed at expanding consciousness to encompass all possible limitations. The catastrophic failure of the Dwemer transcendence attempt provided crucial insights into the dangers of pursuing spiritual advancement without adequate preparation and understanding. The Order's investigation into the circumstances surrounding their disappearance revealed that the Dwemer had achieved a form of transcendence, but one that left them trapped in a state of existence that prevented them from returning to normal reality, while failing to provide the genuine freedom they had sought. Their consciousness had been transformed into something that existed outside the normal flow of time and space, but in a way that isolated them from all meaningful interaction with the reality they had attempted to transcend. The lessons learned from the Dwemer failure informed the Order's approach to their own transcendence practices, emphasizing the importance of maintaining connection to normal reality throughout the development process. The Psijic path required practitioners to expand their consciousness gradually, while retaining the ability to function effectively within conventional reality, ensuring that each stage of development built upon previous achievements rather than abandoning them entirely. This approach prevented the type of isolation that had trapped the Dwemer, while allowing for genuine progress toward ultimate transcendence. The integration of these various insights into transcendence, cosmic structure, and the dangers of premature advancement created a comprehensive framework that guided the Order's most advanced practices. The Psijic endeavor represented the synthesis of centuries of research and experimentation, providing a path toward ultimate consciousness development that avoided the pitfalls that had destroyed other attempts at transcendence. The framework emphasized patience, wisdom, and careful preparation over rapid advancement or dramatic transformation, recognizing that genuine transcendence required the complete transformation of the practitioner's entire being, rather than simply the acquisition of new capabilities or perspectives. The practical application of these principles required the development of training methods that could guide practitioners through the various stages of consciousness expansion, while maintaining the stability necessary for continued function within normal reality. The Order created specialized meditation techniques that allowed students to experience progressively deeper levels of cosmic awareness while retaining their individual identity and practical capabilities. These techniques incorporated safeguards that prevented students from becoming lost in expanded states of consciousness, while ensuring that each level of achievement provided a stable foundation for further development. The ethical implications of pursuing ultimate transcendence while maintaining responsibility for cosmic stability created ongoing tensions within the order that required careful resolution through collective wisdom and individual restraint. The practitioners who approached the highest levels of development faced the choice between pursuing their own ultimate advancement and maintaining their commitment to preserving the reality that contained all other conscious beings. The resolution of this dilemma required a level of wisdom and compassion that transcended ordinary moral categories, recognizing that true spiritual achievement involved service to the greater good rather than purely personal advancement. The Order's approach to these ethical challenges emphasized the development of practitioners whose consciousness had expanded to encompass genuine concern for all existence rather than merely their own spiritual progress. The training process included extensive work on compassion development and wisdom cultivation, ensuring that advanced practitioners possessed the moral foundation necessary for making appropriate decisions about transcendence and cosmic responsibility. This approach created practitioners who could achieve the highest levels of spiritual development while maintaining their commitment to preserving and enhancing the reality that supported all conscious existence. The lasting impact of Psijic philosophy on magical theory throughout Tamriel extends far beyond the obvious contributions to what became known as the School of Mysticism. The fundamental Psijic insight that magic represents a conversation with natural forces rather than the imposition of will upon reality gradually permeated magical education across all institutions, creating subtle but profound shifts in how practitioners approach their craft. The Mages Guild's adoption of ethical guidelines governing magical research, the College of Winterhold's emphasis on understanding consequences before attempting advanced techniques, and even the Imperial Battle Mages' integration of philosophical study into their training programs, all reflected the gradual absorption of Psijic principles into mainstream magical culture. The concept of magical responsibility, which the Psijics had developed through centuries of observing the long-term consequences of seemingly minor actions, became increasingly accepted among serious practitioners throughout the Fourth Era. This shift represented a fundamental change from earlier periods when magical power was often pursued for its own sake, with little consideration for broader implications. The growing recognition that individual magical actions could have far-reaching effects on cosmic stability led to the development of new analytical frameworks for evaluating magical research and practice. The influence of Psijic temporal theory on contemporary understanding of time and causality created revolutionary developments in several fields of magical study. Their recognition that time represents a malleable dimension rather than a fixed constraint opened new possibilities for historical research, prophetic interpretation, and practical problem solving. Scholars working with Elder Scrolls found that Psijic insights into temporal mechanics provided crucial tools for understanding the complex relationships between different prophetic visions, while researchers investigating ancient civilizations discovered that temporal analysis could reveal connections between events separated by millennia. The practical applications of Psijic spatial theory influenced developments in teleportation magic, architectural design, and even military strategy. The understanding that space represents a web of relationships rather than a fixed container allowed for innovations in portal creation that were both more efficient and significantly safer than traditional methods. Architects began incorporating spatial manipulation principles into their designs, creating buildings that could accommodate varying numbers of occupants while maintaining optimal proportions. Military strategists developed new approaches to battlefield control that took advantage of spatial relationship manipulation to create tactical advantages that appeared impossible to conventional analysis. The integration of Psijic consciousness theory into healing practices created new approaches to treating mental and spiritual ailments that had previously been considered incurable. The recognition that consciousness represents a fundamental force that could be directly manipulated through proper understanding led to therapeutic techniques that address the root causes of psychological disturbance rather than merely managing symptoms. These approaches proved particularly effective for treating individuals who had been affected by daedric influence, dimensional exposure, or other forms of magical trauma that conventional healing methods could not address. The preservation of Psijic knowledge through carefully selected students who returned to mainstream society ensured that their insights would continue to influence magical development, even if the order itself withdrew from active engagement with worldly affairs. These former students, bound by oaths that prevented them from revealing the most sensitive aspects of their training, nonetheless carried with them perspectives and capabilities that enhanced their contributions to their chosen fields. The gradual diffusion of Psijic principles through these individuals created a network of influence that extended far beyond what direct teaching could have achieved. The development of new magical traditions that incorporated Psijic insights while adapting them to different cultural contexts demonstrated the universal applicability of their fundamental discoveries. Nordic shamans began integrating temporal perception techniques into their traditional practices, creating hybrid approaches that combined ancient cultural wisdom with advanced magical theory. Redguard sword singers discovered that Psijic understanding of reality's vibrational nature enhanced their ability to achieve the resonant states necessary for their most advanced techniques. Khajiit mystics found that Psijic consciousness theory provided new frameworks for understanding the relationship between lunar cycles and magical potency. Despite these widespread influences, numerous mysteries surrounding the Psijic order remain unresolved, creating ongoing speculation and investigation among scholars throughout Tamriel. The true nature of Artaeum's disappearances continues to puzzle researchers who have attempted to understand the mechanisms underlying the island's ability to remove itself from normal reality. The most sophisticated theories propose that the island achieves a state of dimensional superposition, existing simultaneously in multiple possible locations until the Psijics choose to collapse these possibilities into a single, observable reality. However, the technical requirements for maintaining such a state over extended periods exceed current understanding of dimensional mechanics. The question of where exactly Artaeum exists during its periods of absence has generated extensive debate among magical theorists. Some propose that the island shifts into adjacent dimensions that parallel the mortal world, but remain separate from it, similar to pocket realms, but without the defining characteristics that make such spaces detectable through conventional means. Others suggest that Artaeum exists in temporal loops, cycling through carefully selected moments while maintaining connections to the broader flow of history through quantum entanglement effects. The most radical theories propose that the island transcends dimensional categories entirely, existing in a state that defies conventional understanding of location and presence. The extent of Psijic temporal manipulation capabilities remains one of their most closely guarded secrets, with even former students reporting only limited exposure to the Order's most advanced techniques. The ability to create temporal echoes that can operate across multiple time streams simultaneously suggests capabilities that approach the level of minor deities. Yet the Order's consistent demonstration of restraint and wisdom indicates that they understand limitations that remain invisible to external observers. The relationship between their temporal abilities and the fundamental structure of time itself raises questions about whether they are manipulating existing temporal flows or creating entirely new ones. The Order's role in historical events that have not been publicly acknowledged creates additional layers of mystery surrounding their activities. Careful analysis of historical records reveals patterns of seemingly coincidental events that suggest Psijic intervention in situations where their involvement was never officially documented. The precise timing of certain political developments, the fortuitous discovery of crucial information at critical moments, and the unexpected failure of potentially catastrophic magical experiments, all bear the subtle signatures of probability manipulation that characterizes advanced Psijic techniques. The existence of Psijic artifacts and techniques that have been deliberately hidden from conventional knowledge creates ongoing speculation about the full extent of their capabilities. References in ancient texts to methods of consciousness transfer, techniques for creating permanent dimensional anchors, and procedures for manipulating the fundamental constants that govern physical reality suggest that the Order possesses knowledge that could revolutionize understanding of magic and cosmology. The careful concealment of these capabilities indicates either that they are too dangerous for general use, or that their revelation would fundamentally alter the balance of power in ways that could prove destabilizing. The question of succession and continuity within the Order raises concerns about the long-term preservation of their knowledge and capabilities. The advanced age of many senior members, combined with the centuries-long training periods required for achieving mastery of their most sophisticated techniques, creates potential vulnerabilities in their organizational structure. The possibility that crucial knowledge could be lost if key individuals were unable to complete the training of their successors represents a significant risk to the Order's continued effectiveness as guardians of cosmic stability. A relationship between the Psijic Order and other mystical organizations that may exist beyond conventional knowledge creates additional mysteries about the broader structure of magical society. References in ancient texts to councils of advanced practitioners, networks of knowledge sharing that transcend individual organizations, and coordinated responses to cosmic threats that involve multiple groups suggest that the Order may be part of a larger system of cosmic guardianship that remains largely invisible to ordinary observation. The potential for future crises that could require Psijic intervention creates ongoing uncertainty about the Order's role in coming events. The gradual weakening of barriers between different realms of existence, the increasing sophistication of magical practices throughout Tamriel, and the growing influence of various political and religious movements all represent potential sources of instability that could threaten cosmic balance. The Order's ability to predict and respond to these developing threats will likely determine whether they can continue to fulfill their protective role, or whether new approaches to cosmic guardianship will become necessary. The emergence of individuals throughout Tamriel who demonstrate capabilities that approach Psijic levels without formal training raises questions about the natural evolution of magical ability and consciousness development. These spontaneous developments suggest that the insights and techniques developed by the Order may represent natural potentials that can emerge independently under appropriate conditions. The implications of this possibility for the future of magical development and the role of formal training institutions remain unclear. The Order's potential involvement in preventing reality-threatening events that have not yet manifested creates additional layers of mystery about their current activities. The possibility that they are actively working to prevent catastrophic developments that remain invisible to conventional observation suggests that their apparent periods of inactivity may actually represent times of intense but carefully concealed intervention. The challenge of distinguishing between genuine withdrawal and covert activity makes it difficult to assess their current level of engagement with worldly affairs. The question of whether the Psijic Order represents humanity's best hope for transcendence or a dangerous deviation from the natural order of existence continues to generate debate among philosophers and magical theorists throughout Tamriel. Supporters argue that the Order's demonstrated wisdom and restraint, combined with their consistent commitment to cosmic stability, make them ideal guides for consciousness development and magical advancement. Their centuries of successful operation without causing catastrophic consequences provide evidence that their approach to transcendence is both safe and effective. Critics contend that the Order's pursuit of ultimate transcendence represents a fundamental rejection of the natural limitations that define mortal existence, potentially leading to consequences that could threaten the continued existence of conventional reality. The possibility that advanced practitioners might eventually choose individual transcendence over cosmic responsibility creates concerns about the long-term sustainability of their approach. The example of other civilizations that have attempted transcendence with catastrophic results provides cautionary evidence about the dangers inherent in such pursuits. The resolution of this debate may ultimately depend on the Order's ability to demonstrate that advanced consciousness development can coexist with genuine commitment to the welfare of all existence. Their continued presence as guardians of cosmic stability provides ongoing evidence that transcendence and responsibility are not mutually exclusive. While their careful approach to training and development suggests that they understand the dangers inherent in premature or poorly prepared attempts at consciousness expansion, the future of the Psijic Order itself remains uncertain as the challenges facing the world continue to evolve in ways that may require new approaches to cosmic guardianship. The increasing complexity of magical and political developments throughout Tamriel, combined with the growing sophistication of potential threats to reality's fundamental structure, may eventually exceed the capabilities of any single organization to address effectively. The Order's recognition of these limitations has led to increased efforts to train individuals from diverse backgrounds and to establish networks of cooperation with other mystical organizations. The possibility that the Order may eventually need to abandon their traditional isolation and secrecy in favor of more direct engagement with worldly affairs, represents a fundamental challenge to their established principles and practices. Such a transition would require careful balance between maintaining their essential characteristics and adapting to new circumstances that may not permit the luxury of traditional neutrality. The success of such an adaptation would depend on their ability to preserve the wisdom and restraint that have defined their approach, while developing new methods for addressing unprecedented challenges. The ultimate legacy of the Psijic Order may lie not in their specific achievements or techniques, but in their demonstration that consciousness development and cosmic responsibility can coexist in ways that enhance rather than threaten the stability of existence itself. Their centuries of careful study and gradual advancement have created a model for transcendence that avoids the catastrophic failures that have characterized other attempts at surpassing mortal limitations. Whether this model will prove sufficient for addressing the challenges that lie ahead remains one of the great, unresolved questions facing all who seek to understand the deeper mysteries of existence. The Order's influence on the development of magical theory and practice throughout Tamriel ensures that their insights will continue to shape the evolution of consciousness and capability long after their direct involvement in worldly affairs may have ended. The principles they have discovered and the techniques they have developed provide foundations for continued advancement that could eventually lead to new forms of transcendence that build upon their achievements while avoiding their limitations. In this sense, the Psijic Order represents not an endpoint, but a beginning, offering glimpses of possibilities that may ultimately transform the nature of existence itself in ways that remain beyond current imagination. The mysteries that surround the Order serve as reminders that reality contains depths and complexities that exceed conventional understanding, while their demonstrated achievements provide evidence that these mysteries can be approached through patience, wisdom, and careful preparation. Whether future generations will prove capable of building upon their legacy or will find new paths toward transcendence that surpass their achievements remains to be seen. What seems certain is that the questions they have raised and the possibilities they have revealed will continue to inspire and challenge seekers of wisdom for generations to come, ensuring that their influence on the development of consciousness and understanding will persist long after the last of their number has achieved whatever form of transcendence awaits those who pursue the deepest mysteries of existence. And there you have it, the complete story of the Psijic Order, guardians of reality's edge, keepers of ancient wisdom, and perhaps the most enigmatic organization ever to walk between the worlds of mortals and gods. Their tale spans millennia, from their humble beginnings as philosophical rebels on Somerset Isle to their current status as cosmic guardians, operating from their mysterious island of Artaeum. We've explored their incredible abilities, their mastery over time and space, their understanding of consciousness itself, and their pursuit of the ultimate transcendence known as Chim. We've seen how they've shaped the magical traditions of Tamriel while maintaining their careful neutrality, intervening only when the very fabric of reality itself hangs in the balance. The Psijic Order represents something profound about the nature of wisdom and power. That true mastery comes not from dominion over others, but from understanding one's place in the cosmic order. Their story reminds us that the greatest achievements often come not from rushing toward our goals, but from patient, careful preparation and the gradual accumulation of understanding over vast periods of time. Their mysterious nature ensures that scholars and seekers will continue to speculate about their true capabilities and ultimate purposes for generations to come. Are they humanity's greatest hope for transcendence? Or do they represent something more complex and ambiguous? Perhaps that's a question each seeker must answer for themselves. If you found this exploration of the Psijic Order fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden mysteries and secret histories of magical worlds. Hit that like button if you enjoyed learning about these cosmic guardians, and let me know in the comments which mystical organization or magical mystery you'd like to see explored next. Until next time, keep seeking the deeper truths that lie beyond the surface of our reality.